Welcome to the Entertainment Insiders official podcast with your hosts, the Big C and the Big O.
Hey guys, welcome to the Entertainment Insiders, your go-to source for reviews and all things entertainment. Today we're going to be bringing to you a special episode of the Entertainment Insiders, running down a history of Nintendo and Sony. And right here we're going to start with Sony and Nintendo's beginning relationships from the beginning. Tell us how it all began.
Of course, you know, the Nintendo was a toy company going back almost to the 1800s.
Right, they made game cards.
Very old company, and you know, eventually they got into electronic gaming and whatnot, and they made the first Nintendo home console in 1985, the NES, and then you know that lasted from 85 to about the early 1990s, and that's when they released the Super Nintendo.
My favorite console of all time.
It's definitely one of the best consoles, and the archetype for every console out today, from the shoulder buttons, directional pad, to the 4-button interface. So one of the archetype for every game console today. Now, in the early 90s, Sony, of course, you know, they were cutting edge on speakers and all things entertainment,
television,
everything. You know, they came to Nintendo. They got together. Nintendo and Sony still have a great relationship to this day, just not the PlayStation branch. Well, they came together and then they said, well, we want to make Super Nintendo that plays this. And that's where the original concept for the the Sony PlayStation came from. Right. It was a Super Nintendo that played this, and they came together to make it, but through different disputes, through who was gonna do what and how it was supposed to take off.
And money.
Yep, Nintendo all came from money. Nintendo stopped the deal, and a whole bunch of other stuff happened where Nintendo actually could have lost different franchises or whatnot. But they stopped the deal altogether, and Sony went on to become their greatest rival and to top them time after time, you know, in the console race or the console wars as it's been named, you know. But it all comes from the Nintendo Sony PlayStation. It would have been really interesting to see that happen.
Mm-hmm. Well, what are some of the games from back then? Do you think you can obviously tell when you look at Crash Bandicoot? You can tell the mark and where it comes from. Yep. You can tell where its roots come from. So you can tell they work together.
Yep.
Platforming.
Yep, platforming.
What games do you see that they kind of bounced off of each other? Do you think they make games?
Well, you know, being two Japanese companies, two very old Japanese companies, they have, you know, traditional values and traditional senses when it comes to video games. But, you know, as far as if Sony is copying Nintendo, you have the Crash Bandicoot series, you have Crash Bandicoot Racing.
Mario Kart race ripoff if I ever seen one.
There you go. I mean, it's probably the biggest example.
I don't know how that wasn't shut down, to be honest with you.
Exactly. You know, it's more so like a shot at Nintendo more so than anything. Then you have what was that game? The PlayStation Battle All-Stars?
All-Star Battle? Yeah.
That, to me, is the biggest ripoff because...
From Super Smash.
Yeah, Super Smash Bros. I mean, Super Smash is the most original fighting game you can... It's only a Nintendo thing, and they copied it, you know, through and through. They copied it, you know. So, and then you have Little Big Planet Karting. You know, of all the racing games out there, they take Little Big Planet, their most kid-friendly game, just like, you know, how Nintendo has their kid and family-friendly type games, and they release another karting game. You know, so a lot of fans look at that as something small, but in reality, it's just like Sony taking shots at the older brother. You know,
right? So you see a whole lot of the fanboy wars. All comes down to two people: the Microsoft fanboy and the Sony fanboy.
Pretty much.
The Nintendo fanboy, you see them every now and then, but they're kind of in the background. For every Nintendo fanboy comment you'll see 1,000 replies in there and just bashing them.
That's true.
Because they like Nintendo over Sony, even though Sony basically owes their gaming success to Nintendo. Because without Nintendo making the D-pad, the basic layout for a home console, there would be no Sony Entertainment gaming console. The video games, Nintendo got that ball rolling. I mean, besides the little pinball Atari and stuff like that, there was nothing until Nintendo brought it to us at home.
That's true.
You know what I mean?
And we don't mean to bring up the 4 buttons on the controller, you know, or the directional pad. Even though Nintendo did innovate that, we're not trying to say, you know, PlayStation branch copied that or Sega copied that, you know, because that's where it was going. But Nintendo is known to be the most innovative company there is.
They still are.
Yes, pretty much to this day, and that's what the bread and butter is.
Everything they do, they try to make it different. You know what I mean? The Wii U, the Switch, it's all different. They're just trying to make the, Xbox 7 just
more
more
powerful.
Yeah.
Even though Sony does have its own innovations, and Microsoft with the Xbox definitely has its own innovations, and I seen that more when I did more studying. I definitely seen that.
Well, the next big thing I realized was some of the copying going on back in 06.
Yeah.
When you got the Wii and you got all the motion controls, it took off, absolutely blew everything out the water, right? With the numbers it was selling, the games, it was crazy.
It was nuts.
The gimmick, it was crazy. Everybody loved it. Old people, young people, people who never gamed before, they loved it. Next thing you know, you turn around and Sony has this, and I don't even know what it's called because it was absolute garbage.
PlayStation Move, I believe.
PlayStation Move, and it's this little glowing wand that looks like a Wii U nunchuck.
Yes.
And
with a glowing ball at the top.
What is this?
Yep. The games for that, they didn't go anywhere. I'm gonna leave my personal opinion out of it, but the games didn't go anywhere. They pretty much stopped it after a year and a half.
It disappeared.
Exactly. The PlayStation in the beginning of its life cycle was not selling well. The Xbox 360 was a premier console at that time, and then
online.
05, 06, the Xbox 360 was the main gamer console. PlayStation wasn't selling well at all in the beginning. It overtook at the end, and it did come out very successful. But after the Xbox 360, you had the Wii come out, and man, it took off like wildfire. And I mean, you had old people playing, young people playing. It was amazing. And then a few years later, they started in 06 with the motion controls. You've seen in 2010, I believe it was, that's when the PlayStation Move came out. And then even Microsoft tried to come in on the motion controls, but they did it in a different way. We're not gonna, blatantly just rip off Nintendo. We're gonna at least, if this is the trend, we're gonna at least try to do it in a respectable manner and do it, pave our own way through it. But Sony or Nintendo, PlayStation directly took, the whole concept.
It was crazy. I'm so glad it flopped.
Yeah,
it deserved it. It was horrible, and it's the same thing as, and you can't say Sony copied Nintendo in the on the Move gaming market. With handhelds, but they definitely took, it's like another shot at Nintendo. Oh, you guys got the handheld market under wrap. We're gonna try to break into that with the PSP.
Man,
with the Vita, they both flopped.
Yeah, they sold. The PSP sold relatively well, but compared to the original DS, I mean,
it's not even close.
Yeah, it was a flop.
And people were saying the same thing. They're saying now this all leads up to a greater point. People were saying the same thing about the PSP and the Vita compared to the DS, 3DS, as they're starting to say right now. It's way more powerful. So because of the graphic capabilities, it's going to be way better, have way better games. How has that worked out for them?
It doesn't work out, and Nintendo proved that with the GameCube. They said they believe they had the most powerful console. Of course, the Xbox had more powerful visuals because of the processing power. It had PC capabilities. For at that time period, it was revolutionary, but GameCube was right below it. When it comes to raw power. So Nintendo learned their lesson. But PlayStation, they released the PSP, they released the Vita. But if you're all flash and no substance, what can that get you?
Exactly.
It doesn't get
and
you.
And they tried to get the Vita to take off, by bringing some of Sony's biggest games to it, right?
Yeah,
like they bought Uncharted, God of War. They bought multiple God of Wars, and a whole bunch of. They bought a Call of Duty, stuff like that. But Nintendo has all these other studios that just do handheld stuff for them.
Yeah, so it's just been a rat race for them that they can't win. Which is funny because you don't think of failure when you look at the PlayStation branch of Sony. You don't see failure when they have a lot of mishaps. And and when it comes back to the copying, do you remember when the PSP was able to hook up to the home console, and how the Vita can hook up to the console, just how the GameCube did that with the Game Boy Advance back in 2001, 2002. They were doing that then. So that's another thing. Like Sony's taking those jabs.
Yep. That brings us to our next point. Let's talk about the Sony Playman.
The Sony Playman. Oh man. We're not sure if it's a real thing just yet, but when it comes to the PlayStation branch of Sony, it wouldn't surprise me at all.
It wouldn't surprise me at all, man. Yeah. I'm seeing these images and I'm seeing all these people comment on these threads. I got a lot of time at work where I can look through all these gaming threads, movie threads on Facebook, various websites, on YouTube itself. And people are saying, oh, well, Sony should definitely do this, basically copy the Switch because it'll be more powerful. The same thing as the PSP and the Vita. Same exact thing.
Man, it's actually a sad thing, and I don't like to pick sides in the console wars or anything like that. I really don't like to, but people always talk about the struggling Nintendo, which I don't think they're struggling at all in any area, financially. But it's
Nintendo?
like, yeah, I don't think.
No, they're not. They're not, because their expenses are always low.
Exactly.
Like Microsoft and Sony, to a smaller extent, can afford to take hits on the console that Nintendo can't. So they efficiently make their consoles, their hardware.
That's true. That's very true.
And most of their games and all that come out from in studio, in-house.
But exactly, Nintendo being a smaller company, how can they thrive when you have somebody on your back constantly trying to outdo you and whatnot? It's kind of an insult to that. There's no honor amongst thieves, I guess, or all fair and love and war, however you want to say it. But it's just kind of crazy, and the history that the two companies have together. Going back with Square Enix, back then it was called Square or Squaresoft. Nintendo had a great relationship with them. And then, things went sour, which tends to happen a lot with Nintendo if you look back at the history.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, and Square went to the PlayStation, and then they said, we're going to try to crush Nintendo. Their sole goal was to destroy Nintendo with PlayStation. That was their goal, which they almost succeeded in the 90s, in the early 2000s, they almost did that, so we'll see, man, with the